some backroom technology kinks. We're so excited to have you here today for this launch of a fabulous new book from the Heinz History Center. I'm Ann Mariruth, the Chief Historian, Director of the Curatorial Division, and it's my great honor to welcome you all today and to introduce our author, Melissa Marinaro. We're also going to meet Cathy Cerrone Fratto and Ruberto later in the program. But first, let me tell you a little bit about Melissa. Melissa is the director of the Italian American program. She's been with the Heinz History Center for more than 7 years. Educated at Columbia College in Chicago. She got her MFA in art history at Savannah School of Art and Design. She brings an expertise in immigrant history and material and visual culture to the History Center, but she's really distinguished her time with us by creatively finding new ways to bring our fabulous collection to new audiences around the nation, around the world, and of course, here in the region of Western Pennsylvania. Melissa has overseen the digitization of our oral history collections. She's shared the collection with scholars who have used it in new and inventive ways, and she's done public outreach, programming, lectures, and publications like the beautiful book, Highlights from the Italian American Collection, that we introduced to you today. Please join me in welcoming our author and the leader of our panel today, Melissa Marinaro.
Thank you so much, Anne. And thank you to everyone who's tuned into our live broadcast. And thanks for bearing with us while we worked through a few technical difficulties as we navigate this new digital era. Today, I'm so excited to share with you our latest publication, Highlights from the Italian American Collection, Western Pennsylvania Stories. As Anne said, my name is Melissa, and I'm the director of the Italian American program at the History Center. I know many of you who are tuned in know about our program, but for those of you who don't, our mission is to document, preserve, and interpret the history and culture of Italian Americans in Western Pennsylvania through building a permanent collection of material culture, which you're going to learn about today. And we share this with the public through exhibitions, programming, educational outreach, and publications such as this one. This year, the History Center is celebrating 30 years of documenting the Italian American community of our region. And to acknowledge this milestone, we put together a publication that is highlighting some of the many incredible stories that the museum has captured over the years. In the first part of the program, I'm going to share with you my screen and tell you a little bit about what you can expect to find in the new book. Then we're going to transition to talking with Cathy Cerrone Fratto, who is the first curator of the collection. And then we will hear some closing remarks from Dr. Ruberto. We're going to save 15 minutes at the end of the program to do some Q&A, and I've already seen some great conversations in the chat. So make sure if you have any questions, put them in the chat and I will moderate that conversation at the end. But for now, what I would like to do is I would like to share my screen with you. And I think I need Robert to enable my screen sharing. If he could please do that for me. So here we go.
You should be good now, Melissa.
Thank you so much. Okay, so what we are looking at here is the cover of the new book and our table of contents. And as you can see, the book is organized into 4 chapters: the Journey to America, Work, Food, and Community. Each chapter begins with a 4-page spread that outlines the theme of the chapter, and you'll see some illustrative examples from the collection. In this first chapter, we have objects that tell stories about life in Italy and about the immigration experience. As we all know, Italian migrants came to the United States in large waves at the turn of the 20th century. But in our community, we also saw smaller waves that came after World War II. With each chapter of the book, we have laid out the stories chronologically. So you're going to notice not only a progression of time through the objects, but you're also going to read about the progression of our community in America. First, we came as foreigners, then we naturalized and became citizens, and in more recent history, we have come to identify ourselves as Americans of Italian heritage. The following chapter, Work, is looking at material culture that is related to how Italian migrants and their descendants earned a living. This chapter has an interesting narrative because the stories featured show the progressions of Italian Americans in the American workforce. They began primarily as blue-collar laborers and tradesmen. And in the mid-20th century, we started to see more positions open up to Italian Americans and Catholics. And we will find that some of the jobs become white-collar professional jobs. We even see Italian Americans who are working as doctors, lawyers, and in politics. I also want to note that this picture, which I'm going to move out of the way so you can see, but this picture that is my background is one of the pictures featured in the chapter on work in the entry on mining equipment, and this is in Avella, Pennsylvania. The chapter on food looks at Italian foodways traditions and how they have been replicated and adapted in America, creating a hybrid cuisine that is influenced by Italian ingredients, but modified to please American palates and appetites. I mentioned before that the entry of each chapter is a 4-page spread. So here you're looking at what the additional pages look like. So you can get a little sense of some of the copy involved. Finally, our last chapter, which is our longest chapter of the book, is on community, and it looks at the variety of communities that we find in the region related to Italian Americans. So communities we defined as everything from ethnic neighborhoods to enclaves in small towns, churches, social clubs, fan groups, and other organizations that were around shared heritage. The entries in this section showcase the diversity of the Italian American experience. For those of you tuned in from Western Pennsylvania, you know that we have people representative of all regions of Italy, North and South. And in this chapter, you can really see how the Italian American experience differs depending on if people lived in urban neighborhoods, if they lived in mining patches, in small towns and rural areas, as well as how their experience might have been different depending on what era they migrated to our region. There are a couple more things that I would like to point out about the book so you can get a better sense of what to expect inside. And this, what we're looking at here, is one of our entries from the chapter Journey to America. The way each chapter is organized, there's anywhere from 10 to 20 stories featured per chapter. And so each spread, you will notice we have an object or objects, and then we have the story related to that. You'll see here, and I'm going to move my cursor over these two maps. And this is a feature you're going to find throughout the book, which is that the maps are locating the collection within geographical spaces. So here you'll see we have our map of Italy, which identifies this object as originating from Molise. This was donated by Joseph D'Andrea, who's someone that Cathy is going to tell us a little bit more about. And when his family left Molise after World War II, they migrated to outside Pittsburgh, which is why you see on the map of Western Pennsylvania, Allegheny County is in red. So I know for a lot of people that are tuned in, they're going to be looking for reflections of themselves within the book. And this is a really good way to try to find what pieces of the collection might be related to where your family's descended from in Italy, or were they settled here in Western Pennsylvania. And with the book, we tried very hard to tell stories, not just of the experience in the city of Pittsburgh, but the experience throughout the region. So you'll notice we have stories from Westmoreland County, Washington County, Beaver County, even as far as Altoona. That's about as far east as we go in the state. Another thing that I'd like to point out about this entry, which you will see in many other entries in the book, is you can get an idea of the interplay between the pieces of the collection. So here we have the aluminum milk pot, but we also have a couple photographs from the Detry Library and Archives, which accompany the story. You'll notice in the text, there is an excerpt from the oral history, and we tried throughout the book to populate the entries with quotes from our oral histories, because these are one of the richest parts of our collection. This is something that Cathy, when she started at the History Center in the early 90s, did a lot of field work collecting oral histories, and they have been quite informative in allowing us to understand not just the regional experience, but also understand the objects better that we have in the collection. Another entry that I want to show you that I think a lot of people are going to recognize because they might have dined here is a colander from Dell's Restaurant in Bloomfield. I wanted to share this because I know we got a lot of Bloomfield people out there, but also because you will see another map in the corner, this one being a map of the city of Pittsburgh. So when we had the ability to identify a piece to a particular neighborhood in the city, this is how we call it out. And something about Dell's story that many of you might not realize is we think of it as a Bloomfield restaurant, but it has its origins in East Liberty, which historically was a site of migration for Italian immigrants before Bloomfield became the contemporary Little Italy that we know today. So you'll also notice with some of these pieces in the collection that they migrated while they were in the region, in the United States. Oftentimes the first stop on a migrant's journey was not the final stop. And I think you'll be surprised to see in this book just how much people moved about our region and the United States. So this will give you a little bit of a sense of what to expect in the book. And what I'd like to do now is turn it over to Cathy, who I mentioned was our first curator of the collection. Cathy is now the engagement coordinator for the University of Pittsburgh's Asian Studies Center and their University Center for International Studies. She served as the first curator of the collection, and she is responsible for bringing in many of the core pieces of the collection, and several of those objects are featured in the book. And she also worked for 14 years as a history teacher, teaching world history and AP US history at Oakland Catholic in Pittsburgh. So I hope you will do a virtual welcome for Cathy, and we're going to have a conversation and talk a little bit about the origins of the collection. So hi, Cathy.
Hey, Melissa. Congratulations on such a beautiful book. It's really going to be something to read and look over. And thank you so much for having me.
Great. Well, if you'd like, I can keep the screen up and you can just let me know when to advance. And to start, tell us a little bit about how the Italian American collection began at the History Center.
Well, it was, I believe, 1994, and there was a very committed group of individuals in the Italian American community in Pittsburgh who were collaborating with the Historical Society of Western Pennsylvania, which was still to become the Heinz History Center, about creating a permanent collection of the story of Italian Americans in Western Pennsylvania. They wanted a repository for that history in oral histories, in archival materials, and in so many of the artifacts that people are able to see today when they come to the History Center, and will be able to see when they read this book. And this was just a very, very dedicated group of individuals. Joseph D'Andrea, who you mentioned, Melissa, who is the former vice consulate of Italy in Pittsburgh, worked very diligently with Louis Astorino, who is an architect and a very active member of the Italian American community. And at that time, John Herbst, who was the director of the Historical Society of Western Pennsylvania, was also very committed to this idea of creating a home for the stories of Italian Americans in Western Pennsylvania. So in many ways, I think that this was a private and philanthropic and sort of civic partnership combined. And it's one of the things I think that makes Pittsburgh such a unique city. You have so many cooperating elements that can come together for the good of the public needs, the public desires to create the story of many groups. Many immigrants came in various waves to the Pittsburgh region. This was just one, but it really showed a truly dedicated and collaborative partnership. So that was really how it all started when I came on in 1994 as the first curator, quite a young, a young person at that time.
Well, that's great. And it's wonderful to hear how the community banded together, because I think that is one of the great things about this collection is it truly is a reflection of that commitment of the exchange between the Historical Society and the community. When you began the program, what kind of objects were you looking for?
Well, right from the get-go, we knew that there were many older Italian immigrants and Italian Americans who whose history was being lost. I remember often that was something that Joe D'Andrea, this is a lovely picture of him there on the screen, he and Lou Astorino, and there were others on the board as well. They really emphasized that this history was going to vanish when these people were no longer with us. So they really put a premium on trying to go out and get the oral histories of people who were older, who had firsthand memories, the primary source documents as immigrants. So that's really a lot of the first foray I made into the community was through personal contacts that members of the board had. But also about 6 months after I started, a journalist for the Post-Gazette named Brian O'Neill got in touch with me. I can't remember how, and said that he would like to come along with me on one of the oral histories that I was conducting. And so I took him with me to Brookline, which is a really lovely neighborhood in the southern reaches of the city of Pittsburgh. And I was interviewing an Italian immigrant who was a former chef at the Duquesne Club, I think. His name was Nicholas Coletti. And Brian O'Neill wrote, there was a Pittsburgh Sunday magazine, and they had a column on the back page of that magazine every week called Last Words. And Brian O'Neill wrote about the oral history that I was conducting and talked about how the Heinz History Center was preparing to open in the Strip District and about the efforts we were making. And we got so many phone calls after that oral history, after that article was published. I remember I just would come into work in the morning and there would be piles of messages taken for me. And there was a lot of energy, as you can see in this image that you're sharing. The former Chautauqua Ice House in the Strip District on Smallman Street was being renovated extensively for the opening of the Heinz History Center. And I think that's me giving a tour with, I think that's Joe D'Andrea, and you can see John Herbst, and I think that's Mrs. Geruso to the side. We were giving tours to potential donors, to people in the community who were interested, and making them understand that there was going to be this big exhibit for the Italian American collection that we were still collecting in real time that would be called From Paesi to Pittsburgh. And there I am sharing the exhibit with some school children. So we were trying to generate interest and excitement in the community about this exhibit that would be showcasing with oral histories, archival materials, and artifacts that I was collecting the story of Italian immigration to Western PA. So.
And you really set the tone in those years by collecting oral histories along with the archives and the artifacts. And that model is something that we have continued to this day. My predecessor, Nicholas Chodola, did a lot of oral history work in the community as well. And I think that's one of the things that makes this collection so rich, not just for people looking for their family histories, but for scholars to be able to hear stories in the voice of the people that experienced and lived them.
Yeah, I know Ann Mataras always said to us, provenance is so important. And when you can tell the whole story about someone's life with their words, their objects, and their images, that that is something, when you put an exhibit together, that will resonate with an audience. And that is so important to being able to tell the whole story. And I think that it touches people very personally when they know that they don't just see an object in front of them, but they know the story that goes with that object, and they can see an image that accompanies that. So whenever we would do an oral history, the first thing we would ask is, do you have any photos or artifacts that you could share that talk about that? And it would be like a gold mine, just a treasure trove, when you kind of got the perfect trifecta, you know, of all three of those things. But that's what we always strove for in the collections process, to get that provenance, the origins of it, and the accompanying materials.
Well, we do have a few spreads from the book that are highlighting objects you brought into the collection. So if it's all right, do you mind if we dig into a couple of these stories and you share with us a little bit about your memories of working with the collection and with donors in the community?
Oh, sure, I would love to.
So I'm going to just skip forward. So I always joke that San Rocco has become an icon for the collection, because he literally is an icon, but he's also become this very recognizable figure in our region because so many migrant communities venerated San Rocco. Could you tell us a little bit about how this particular San Rocco came into the collection?
Yeah, I remember the San Rocco statue, and I think Greg Smith had to help me pick this up. This came from, I believe, Cathy Costa of East Liberty. San Rocco is the patron saint of many paesi, or what are small towns in Calabria, the region of Calabria in southern Italy. And this particular San Rocco statue was used in the festa, the parades that they would do in the summertime. And you can see in front of Our Lady Help of Christians Church in East Liberty, which again, beautiful to see the provenance of the statue connected with an image. They are carrying the statue in a procession through the streets of East Liberty, where at that time a large Italian American community lived, and many of them were Calabrese. There was a wave that came both before World War II and one that came after, and they all venerated San Rocco, and they would, as many of the oral histories I conducted, the individuals would describe pinning money to San Rocco to have your prayers answered, or for auspicious, outcomes. And they really wanted the History Center to have the statue, and it really is an amazing artifact.
And it's incredible considering it was one of the first big pieces to come into the collection, because as you said, it's quite sizable.
Yeah.
I know for those who visited our building in person, when you come to the Special Collections Gallery and you round the corner to see the Italian American display, San Rocco is the first object that greets you. When we reopen on July 1st and you're interested in seeing this in person, you can find him on the 4th floor.
Yeah, and he was in the From Paesi to Pittsburgh exhibit as well when the History Center opened, and I think people really enjoyed viewing the statue.
So this other spread we have are some pieces from the 33-piece Presepio that you brought in.
Yeah, this was an amazing story. There's a family, the Albini family, who are from Vandergrift, Pennsylvania, which is a small river town along the Allegheny. It's kind of near New Kensington, and I did a lot of field work in that region. Many Italian immigrants settled there to work in the mills and in the surrounding industries and businesses that grew out of those mill towns. And Sam Albini was an aspiring artist, and he didn't have many opportunities for an advanced degree. His family, when he was a child, didn't have very much money, and so they fashioned from hand, and this reflected a lot of his artistic aspirations. They crafted from hand the Italian presepio, which is their manger. It's their nativity that every Italian household would have, and they cared for it lovingly over the years. He and his sister about bringing it out every Christmas. And on the face of it, you would look at something like this that was handmade, and it was quite rough around the edges if you looked at it up close, and you might say, well, what worth is this, right? You know, it's just from some construction paper and some recycled cardboard pieces that they painted. But when you really see the love and the tradition that went into creating this presepio village, and the, you know, the sense of, again, tradition that they had for their Italian heritage, it really reflected so many of the sort of aspects that we wanted to capture for the collection. So that's how that presepio came to the Heinz History Center Italian American collection.
And we do have some pieces on display in the building. They're tucked away in our visible storage gallery. So that is also on the 4th floor, but separate from our special collections. And I think they're such wonderful pieces because, as you mentioned, when you get up close and you take in all the details, you really get a sense of the family working together. Thinking about all the great time that the children and their father would have had crafting these each year. And so it's a really nice, not just holiday story, but story about how families passed time together and things they did to make memories. Well, I know this is one of our absolute favorites in the museum.
Yeah, this is such a great story, Melissa. Thanks for sharing this one. So Providenza Crisanti was one of the most amazing women that I had the chance to interview when I was at the History Center. She was an immigrant who hailed from Termini Imerese, Sicily, which is on the coast of northern Sicily, about 30 minutes or so east of Palermo by car anyway. And she came to the United States after she was married to Giuseppe, her husband, who was a produce vendor in the Strip District. And she donated to the History Center the hand-painted silk shawl that you can see in the book that she wore over, she wore on the ship on the way from Sicily to the United States for her honeymoon. So she was married and then they came to Pittsburgh. And you can see the image of her on the ship with her husband, newly married, Giovanni, Crisanti, and she's wearing the shawl and she kept it. And it's just gorgeous. It's a hand-painted shawl. She was an incredible woman, very strong, very intelligent. She never had the opportunity, as we, think today, the sky's the limit. She was at home with her children, doing an amazing job, raising them while her husband built up their produce business. You can see him with his cart in the Strip District. Many Sicilians who came to Pittsburgh worked in the produce industry in the Strip District. And he started with a cart and ended up with a wholesale company. So they did quite well for themselves. And she gave us some of the materials from the family business. And I think, had some other photos as well. But it was a really, again, we talk about provenance, right? It was a story that we had a lot of supporting materials for. And the shawl was in the From Paesi to Pittsburgh exhibit when the History Center opened as well.
And that shawl is also on view in our special collections gallery in the Italian section as well. Our final piece that I wanted to share, which has become a favorite, especially of our learning team, when we have young students that come to the History Center to learn about immigration to our region, Angela Pasquale's story has become one of the favorite stories that they like to share, and especially this travel suit, which has a really great story that Angela shared in the oral history you did with her.
Yeah, Angela is also an amazing woman, and she was incredible to spend time with. She is an example of Italian immigrants who came after World War II. Her family was from a small town outside of Naples, Italy, called Nusco in southern Italy. And she is an incredible seamstress. She made this suit. She was very excited about the family's decision to come to the United States after World War II. There was a significant wave that came as war refugees in the late 40s and 50s into the 60s. And so this suit she made for the trip to the United States, and you can see how proudly she's posing in this image. She made her life in Pittsburgh. She married and had a family, and she continued to be an amazing seamstress, and she did all kinds of really fascinating art with her needlework. Very, very talented, a strong woman, and had such an interesting story to tell about her experience coming to the United States, settling here as a young woman, and sharing her excitement about that journey to the United States.
And for people who have seen our display, while we don't have Angela's suit currently on display, the steamship trunk that we have on display in special collections belonged to her grandfather, who was a bird of passage. So that is a migrant that used to go back and forth between the United States and Italy, would come here, would work jobs, would go back. And as I understand it, he never permanently settled in our region. So while that's not in the book, it's a very interesting piece of this story, which is that you'll see other examples in the book where generations of a family lived between Italy and the United States. And all throughout the book, I think people will find that there's been a continued exchange between our two countries at the level of our community here. And it's interesting today to see how that conversation between Italy and Italian Americans in the United States remains open. Now, unless there's anything else you want to chat about, Cathy, it now seems like a really good time for us to turn over the conversation to Dr. Laura Ruberto, so she can provide some concluding remarks about what it means to collect about Italian Americans and what is the importance of having collections like these as a part of the Historical Society. So first, let me offer my introduction of Laura. She is a humanities professor at Berkeley City College, where she teaches courses in film and cultural studies. Her research and writing focuses on Italian and Italian American film, material culture, and cultural theories of migration. Her most recent books are the 2-volume collection, New Italian Migrations to the United States, which was co-edited with Joseph Shora. And she is a former Fulbright scholar to Italy. Her work has also been supported by the National Endowment for the Humanities. She is an editor of the Fordham University Press book series, Critical Studies in Italian America. And she was recently named a Mellon Foundation American Council of Learned Society faculty fellow. And she is a native Pittsburgher who, though living in California today, still has roots in our region. And I was so thrilled that we invited her to write the foreword to the book, and she kindly accepted. So thank you, Laura, for being with us today.
Thank you, Melissa. And ciao tutti from California, vis-a-vis Aliquippa, circa sometime in the 1990s behind me. And as Melissa said, I wanted to kind of offer some concluding remarks today and really begin by saying how excited I am to see the book out. I got my copy. I know you can't see it with my screen right now, but I got my copy the other day, and it's just so wonderful to see the great work of the Italian American collection highlighted in the book. And I'm very happy to be part of the book and of this launching today. So thank you, Melissa, and everyone at the Heinz Center for that. It's so meaningful to celebrate and kind of acknowledge the 30 plus years of the collection. And Cathy talk about the field work that she did and the early collection that the community did, and fundraising also that the community did, this kind of forward thinking that Cathy and others had, and that we all get to benefit from today. As Melissa mentioned, I have a kind of special relationship to the collection and in fact to the book. Personally, I myself am an Italian American born and raised in Pittsburgh and have very many good memories of my childhood in Western Pennsylvania. And my family, specifically my father, Raffaele, and my brother, Fabio, have both donated items to the collection. And so they've been a part of the collection's growth and development in the last 10 years or so. And thirdly, and really what I want to talk about here for a few moments, is professionally as a scholar of Italian American culture and history, this collection is just so significant. The collection is important for the individuals and the families who donated items and who told their stories and are continuing to tell their stories with the continual collecting that Melissa is leading. And of course, it's important for the community at large who devoted so much time and money to establish it. But it's also important for ways that it continue to be used now and in the future by people maybe who have no direct association with the objects or with the stories, or maybe even with Western Pennsylvania. And these are things and ways that are probably kind of unimaginable to us now. The way teachers, students, artists, researchers, all of them can currently and in the future kind of continue to kind of use these objects to tell wider stories and different stories. So many of the objects that are highlighted in the book and that are part of the collection tell us stories that are really kind of not always obvious to us, or are often only kind of knowable to a handful of people. And this is something that I think Cathy was sort of was getting at with her kind of talking about the field work that she did. That so many of the objects donated and the stories that the oral stories tell us are these very personal, everyday stories and personal, everyday items. And sometimes at first, they may seem not to say much beyond what for instance, an object was used for, or what a particular event meant to the person who was participating in that event. But yet, when we broaden our thoughts about it, and when that object or that story gets into the hands of a student or a scholar or an artist, suddenly they can take it in different directions and tell stories that are a little bit pushing a kind of a broader narrative, if you will, so that those objects can tell us things about how immigrants lived, how they navigated their new surroundings, how Italian Americans navigated their relationship to other ethnic groups and to America generally. And importantly, they also tell us how these Italian ethnic communities have changed over time. And I think this is something that's particularly significant. And for me, it's one of the most exciting parts of a collection. On the one hand, they may seem to be part of some kind of past that's how things used to be. But on the other hand, these objects also remind us of just one moment in a long, beautifully diverse way Italian Americans experience their lives. Being Italian American is not just one thing, and it's not just one thing to one person. And this leads me to my kind of last point that I wanted to make this afternoon, is that the Heinz Italian American Collection does an excellent job of highlighting the Italian American experience in Western Pennsylvania. And that's not the same history or the same culture of Italians here in California, or Italians in New York or Chicago or elsewhere. There are, frankly, very few, if any, really regionally specific, professionally curated archives of this nature. And so the Heinz collection is very significant for that element. It's important to understanding the broader fabric of the United States, the role immigrants have generally and Italian Americans have specifically in a constantly changing ideas about what it means to live in the United States and to be American. And you can kind of read a little bit about the three connections I have to the collection and I have to the book in the book itself, and see some images of the donated items that my family brought to the collection. But in closing, I'll ask Melissa to put up one photo from the book of a model tank that my grandfather built. And as she's doing that, I'll also just say that with this spread of the model, you'll see a kind of a tank that my grandfather Donato built, as well as a newspaper clipping from the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette from the 1940s that tells us a little bit about the way my family was connected between Pittsburgh and Italy during the war. And that in addition to telling the specific scenario that was affecting my extended family, it sort of perfectly captures the way Italian Americans in Pittsburgh were connected to Italians throughout the Second World War. And with that, I will end. And I know we have some time now for questions, but I just want to thank Melissa again and congratulate her and everyone at the Heinz Center for this publication. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Laura, for your wonderful comments. And thank you especially for acknowledging how unique it is to have a regional collection like this, and for pointing out that here in Western Pennsylvania and by extension, Eastern Ohio and parts of West Virginia, we have an Italian-American culture that has developed because of the experience of being in this region, and because of the act of assimilating into the culture that was present here in Western Pennsylvania. And so I'm very proud that the book calls out more about that experience, more about that identity that we share as Italian Americans. And I'm really looking forward to other Italian Americans and people not of Italian heritage from around the country getting to learn a little bit about some of the things that define our community and have been part of our historical experience here in the region. So we've got some great chats going on, and I don't have any questions just yet. I encourage people to start throwing their questions out, but a couple things that I just want to mention. Here we have a gentleman, Douglas Carlino, that I know from over the years, and he mentioned that his grandmother, Delfina Ventura Carlino, worked at Dell's in East Liberty. So that's very exciting that we have some people who worked in one of the businesses featured in the book. Teresa Casciato, who I know from Aliquippa, mentioned that the photo that's in your background, Laura, shows the San Rocco Festa Band, of which she's a member. I know she's been doing some filming over the years of that band, so it's really exciting that we have some people from Aliquippa tuning in. Likewise, I see here Christine Trimber, who donated some items related to her grandfather and uncles who were located, I'm sorry, I should say they served in World War II. They were located down in South Park, and so they have an entry in the book. And here's a question about the oral history recordings. So they're asking, how do we access those? So right now, the best way to access materials from the collection, both from the archive side and from the artifact side, is to visit the Heinz History Center's website and go to the tab that says Collections. From there, you will be able to access two different portals that we have. One is our Detry Library and Archives catalog, and that allows you to search anything that would be a two-dimensional collection, papers, photographs, audio recordings, visual recordings. All those materials can be found through that portal. Now, we don't have the oral histories uploaded to it, but if there are things that people are interested in, we do have access to the recordings and to the transcripts, and we can happily provide virtual access during this time of the closure. So if you see something you're interested in, you can email the History Center's general email. You can email me directly. All that information is found on our website. I also want to just take a minute to plug our e-museum portal, which is a really exciting new feature that we've only had for the last year at the History Center, which allows you to search our artifacts. So same access point, go to the Collections tab. If you click on History Center Collections, you'll see a link that'll take you to our e-museum portal. And in both search engines, if you just hit Italian American, you'll be able to see what kind of holdings we have tagged. Let's see here. So here is a question on, with such a large and diverse collection, how did you decide what to use in the book? And that's a really good question, because I have to say, this is by no means everything that's in the collection. This is just a sampling of some of the different materials we have collected over the years. And it was hard at times to make selections because there's certainly so many great stories. But for me, it was really important to try to showcase that we are, as Lauda mentioned in her comments, we're a very diverse group, and being Italian American means different things for different people. So I wanted to try to have stories that represented the breadth of what the Italian American experience is, meaning that some people have their ancestry from the north of the country, others have it from central and south Italy. Some people lived in rural counties, and their experience was migrating to a coal mining patch and then settling in a small town. And that rural experience may be very different than someone who came first to the Lower Hill District and then moved into Brookline or Beachview. So I wanted to try to showcase collections that just hit at how many different types of experiences we have, as well as trying to bring it as far into current day as possible. You'll notice that the latest entry in the book is actually some collections items from the 2010s. So we tried to bring it very contemporary. Oh, here's a question that I think this would be good for Cathy and Anne as well. Somebody asked, Dan Cardone asked, whose idea was it to do points in time? In it, his cousin John Antonucci told the story of my great-grandfather, the knife and scissor sharpeners, Francesco Antonucci, who is featured in the book.
Anne?
That was, I mean, the plan always existed to do the points in time exhibit as our overarching orientation exhibit to introduce people to the history of Western Pennsylvania. It was Cathy's work uncovering that Antonucci's story. And then Peter Argentine, who's been a longtime member of our advisory committee and a great friend to the History Center, helped us put together the orientation video for that exhibition. And this was a story that was so moving. We went out and talked to the Antonucci family, and to be there, you know, to bring the scissor sharpener out to that family again, to allow them to like ring the bell and tell their own personal recollections, and the way that the story evolved when John talked about his, I guess his grandfather being out there and, you know, earning a nickel or a dime or a quarter. And when he said, I wish I had some of those quarters, and like kind of turned his head and broke down, it reminds you of the power that these very simple everyday objects have in people's lives. It was just such an important moment for us to say to people and to our community, every life matters, every story is important, and our ability to capture and preserve those for the future, so people can understand what their family went through to build a life in this region, is core of our mission. So these collections and that exhibit was just, and Cathy's work was such a great opportunity to bring all those stories to the fore and to send a really important message to Western Pennsylvania about the people who made this region what it is today.
Now, Cathy, I don't know if you knew this, but people will see it in the book. There was a second scissor sharpener that belonged to Francesco's brother, Antonio, a different branch of the Antonucci family. And when I first came on staff, that was one of the first items I brought into the collection. And it was very exciting to be able to reunite the two scissor sharpeners. And to hear another story from the Antonucci family, because something I wasn't aware of is Antonio Antonucci was a World War I veteran. And we talk a lot about veterans of the Second World War, but there were a lot of Italian immigrants who fought in World War I after only being in this country a few short years. So as we've been pointing out today, you know, these stories, which often are related to one individual or one family, can tell us larger things about history. And we can use these objects to have conversations about more than just Italian heritage. Of course, that's going to be central to it, but there's a lot of ways we can interpret these pieces.
Yeah, I think to Anne's point, the one thing that I would add, and to your point as well, Melissa, what compels us, I think, in the process of conducting oral histories and collecting the materials that support them is they are able to manifest our shared humanity across ages, across, you know, socioeconomic situations, and across ethnic groups and diverse populations. We all share a humanity and the struggles that individuals face regardless. Those are the things that compel us. And so the message is really that we share more than, you know, the things that separate us.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's an excellent point. Here is a question that I think is a really great one. This comes from Janine Giarrusso.
Oh.
And her family's butcher knife is featured in the book. And she wanted to know, what is our current focus of collecting? And I thank her for asking that, because that allows me to make the plug that we are always continuing to collect about the Italian American community. And while we're, of course, interested in the story of those migrants who came to our region, we also document the descendants of those migrants. And so today we are looking for collections that are reflective of the experience of Italian Americans post-war moving forward. You know, we've done a lot of work trying to document small businesses owned by Italian Americans that have passed through generations of a family. We've done a lot of documentation about Italian American sports figures, entertainers, people who have become notable in our community, business leaders, politicians, still continuing to chase down stories from migrants that came after World War II, because that is the generation right now that we are starting to lose. And their stories about life in Italy during the fascist era and during the World War conflict are really instrumental to their stories of migration. So today we are continuing to build upon the work that was started by Cathy and continued by Nick. We're always trying to fill in gaps, and most importantly, we're trying to capture whatever we don't have, because we recognize that there's a lot more stories out there. So we'll continue to do this work as long as Italian Americans continue to inhabit our region. Let's see here. I'm going to look, see what other questions we have. Here's one. Oh, this one comes from my aunt. Hi, Julie. Do you have advice for someone who wants to explore their own family's history and maybe collect some objects? Well, I'll start, and then if anyone else wants to pick this up, but I know one of the things I always preach when I go out to talk to people, which is write it down. Because it's great to know the stories. It's great to be able to tell them in oral form. But to the point that Cathy made when she was talking about the beginning of the collection, is that when we lose those members of our community, we lose the stories if we haven't made an effort to record them. So whenever I go and talk with community groups, I'm always encouraging people to write down what they know about their family history, and if possible, to record it, so there can be something left for posterity. Cathy, do you have anything else to add to that? Or maybe Anne? Okay, let's see. I'm gonna see if we have any more. Well,
Melissa.
Oh yes, go right ahead.
Oh yeah, I just wanted to add, there was what work we're doing that the collection is doing now to kind of just to have you kind of comment on
Lauda, we have lost your audio.
Studies Association, and just this idea of getting the work of the collection out to a broader audience, even beyond Western Pennsylvania, through internet presence, of course, but also through your work with other organizations, Italian American studies scholars and institutions.
So I heard part of your question, and I'm just going to repeat what I heard, that you're wondering what kind of work we are doing today in order to reach out beyond the broader regional community. So I think I got that correct.
Yeah, to have you speak about the connection with the IASA and seeing yourself within a
Absolutely. A lot of my goals when I came on staff to the History Center was to look at ways to make the collection more accessible. And as Anne mentioned, one of the first things I did was digitize the oral histories. And when I was doing that, I realized, well, what's the good in digitizing if people don't know that it's here? We certainly had a lot of people in the region know that the collection was here, but it didn't seem like we had as much of a presence in some of the national organizations like Italian American Studies Association and other groups that have a lot of followers based in the East Coast and the West Coast. So I spent a lot of my time trying to make sure that members of the scholarly community, as well as Italian American interest groups outside Pittsburgh, know that we exist. So I've spent time presenting to different groups, making sure to send out digitized content, trying to keep my line open to any scholars from around the country or the world who want to access our collections in order to do research, and just creating more opportunities for exchange between our program here in Pennsylvania and the network of Italian American Studies scholars that I feel are one of our core audiences, because when I look at this collection, I realize there's so much application for it in the future. But first we need to get it in the hands of those scholars and researchers who are working within the field. So that's been a big effort that I've made to try to make sure that we're going beyond state lines. So I do not see any new questions. If anyone has anything that they want to throw out there, please feel free. We are about 15 minutes past 2, which means that I think we have filled the whole hour time slot. So I don't want to keep people if they've got other stuff to do, but I'm also happy to keep answering questions. But if not, I'm just so thrilled that you all joined us today. And I am so thankful for Anne and Cathy and Lauda and their fantastic comments and observations and memories and stories. And I'm just thrilled that we've had this female powerhouse where we've been able to share some great historical content and also just celebrate with you this amazing milestone. I know Cathy and I have talked about, we just can't believe that for 30 years, this work has been done in our community. And it's something that I think Pittsburgh should be very proud, and our community especially should be very proud of the work they have done to make sure that our heritage doesn't get lost. I think we're going to be one of those collections that into the future, when people look back and want to know what was the Italian American experience, they'll be able to come to Pittsburgh and locate it. And so I hope each of you have a chance to get the book, have a chance to enjoy it. My next task is going to be trying to get it out into our regional libraries so people can have access to it and check it out. And we just thank you so much for being supporters of our program and for bearing with us in this new digital time as we try sharing in brand new ways. Does anyone, do any of our panelists want to have a final thought or comment?
No, just thank you so much for having me on, and congratulations again.
Yeah, thank you, Melissa. Congratulations, and it was wonderful to participate in this book launch.
And Melissa, I just want to congratulate you on the wonderful book, and the staff at the History Center supported you in this effort, and encourage people to access the collection, whether it's online, whether it's virtually, whether it's through the programs that you offer, or through visiting the History Center when we reopen July 1. There's so many great stories the collection has to tell, so many memories, and so much to learn from the past. So I hope people will see this as an opportunity to come and to learn more through all the many ways that you offer them at the History Center.
Oh, grazie mille.
Oh.
Ciao.
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 Ciao.